God bless you. Hope all is going well with you and your family. Just want to kind of come to you today and talk to you a little bit live about the rulers of ancient Kush. I want to talk about the rulers of ancient Kush. I hope that you are doing well and want to kind of share this. And I'm going to be sharing a resource that's going to be available to folks who are members, paid members who are on YouTube. It's already available for those who are at the ancestor level and will be available to everybody very soon. But I want to talk about the rulers of ancient Kush, in particular the Napatan Dynasty. I want to mention these brothers' names. I think it's so important. It's so important for us. It's up to the living to uplift the dead. It's up for the living to uplift those who've passed on, those of our ancestors, those in our heritage, those in our history, those in our family, those who have moved on, those who did their part in history to go down in history and live respectable lives. It's up to us to lift them up. So when we think about this, when we think about our history, it's up to the living to make it move on. So I want to kind of do my part, and I hope that you do your part, and I hope that you leave some comments down below. Let's lift these brothers' names, or let's lift these women's names, or let's talk about them, and let's do our part about pushing our history forward so people can see it. So I would love if you leave some comments down below and we kind of talk about them. We're going to be talking about a couple of things. When we talk about a resource, as I mentioned, that's going to be available, it's already available for those who are members here on YouTube. Thank you so much for who are members. Those who are members at $4.99 a month, and those who are members at $9.99 a month. I very much appreciate $9.99 a month. Those are the ancestor level. I very much appreciate it. This resource and this timeline you can download. If you're a member at an ancestor level, it's already on the site there. You can download it today, and everyone else, I'll be putting it up on our member site very, very shortly so that you can download. But I'm going to be talking about just the whole idea of the timeline of Kush and New Kush, because when I think about it, we hear a lot about people like King Taharqa, and sometimes we hear about, and some people don't even know about King Taharqa and who King Taharqa is. So, and what he was and what he represented. So I want to kind of talk about that and kind of lift them up, because some of us may know some about it, and there are those who I'm sure know nothing about it. So we're going to talk about the whole idea of Kush, ancient Kush, but we're going to talk about it from the standpoint of the Napatan Dynasty, which we'll kind of set up right here. So hope that you are doing well, and just to give you some perspective as you kind of think about it, there are several places. I'll give you a little bit of picture here. This is a picture of a religious center that was in ancient Kerma. And ancient Kerma is in what is today modern day Sudan. It's modern day Sudan, and it is by the third cataract of the Nile, near the modern day area of Kerma. So as you kind of look at that and you kind of get some perspective with it, just gives you some idea of what the city was like, and some of the massiveness of some of the buildings that they built in ancient Kerma. It wasn't just one place. It was more than one place in that area that they built. So as we talk about this, we're going to kind of dig into this and kind of get the timeline going. Now, it will surprise no one when we talk about the Sudan and we talk about northeastern Africa. It will surprise no one that you have people who have been in this area, obviously, for hundreds of thousands, even millions of years. We know that the fossil record shows that human beings come from Africa. Human ancestors come from Africa. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about hominids or Homo erectus or Homo sapiens. Each of those branches, if you will, developed in Africa, started in Africa first, and went out and peopled the rest of the world. So whether you're Homo erectus or, like I said, Homo sapiens, it doesn't matter. And even when you look at Homo sapien activity some 300,000 years ago and up until now, you'll see that they started in Africa. So it should surprise no one that you will find people up and down Africa. I mean, it's so funny when we think about very, racist and biased things that have been said about Africa and things within Africa, that people will talk about the birthplace of humankind as if there were not people there thousands of years ago doing stuff that people do. Human beings like you and I doing all types of things, developing societies, trading with one another, utilizing their resources, utilizing their natural resources, counting, using mathematics, looking at the stars, developing families, looking at God, developing religion, all types of developing language, all types of things that human beings do to live and to survive and thrive is taking place on the continent of Africa. So it will surprise no one to know that. And it's just kind of crazy when people talk about that. And we kind of, a lot of times, I think one of the tricks in history is a lot of times is that people want to make you isolate things, right? And make you think, oh, so this only happened here. And, when we look at this map here and we look at Kemet, just to give us some perspective, we'll say, well, this was Kemet and this was Nubia and this was the area around Kush where we see Kerma. And of course, they didn't interact, and they only interacted in one way when, with one way with Kemet bringing into Kush. That just did not happen. This was a highway. This was a watery freeway up and down the Nile for thousands of years, for tens of thousands of years. People have been going up, not just the past 2,000 or 3,000 years, but for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, people have been going up and down the Nile. It's a highway, it's a freeway. And this whole area, if you've seen some of my talks before, around before Kemet and Napta Playa and places beyond that, and mathematics and things of that we've done, just so in the whole continent of Africa, people are doing things. People are trading, they're counting, they're using things for currency and types of trade in terms of what's valuable to them. They're trying to develop resources and to make themselves rich and all types of things. And they're honoring God, and they are doing religious ceremonies, and they're getting myrrh, and they're getting incense, and they're getting ivory. They're doing all these types of things even 3,000 years before Christ. Even before Kemet becomes a country, even if you go 3,500 years, 3,800 years, 4,000 years before Christ, BC, people are doing these things. So it's up and down the Nile. And when you isolate it and kind of look at this whole corridor that is Northeast Africa, you will find that this is happening up and down. And when you think about it, when we think about Kerma, and I'm going to mention Kerma just because it was a center, an area that, ancient Kush, or in some places it was called Yam, was a center of activity. So this area was a center of activity some 3,500 years before Christ, BC, and you find trade going up and down there. So if you think about ivory from elephant tusk, you think about gold, you think about exotic things like monkeys and incense. And it isn't just the people from Kerma around this area. There are people all up and down this area. There are people, whether they begin to be A group Nubians or the Medjay or people from Punt or all kinds of people whose names we don't even know. We may not even remember, may not even have carried on in history, that are all up and down the Nile, all east, south, west, north, all of this area. People around this area doing things that people do, right? So it's important to understand that this is taking place, and this is part of the history of what would make ancient Kush powerful and popular, is its location. So as I kind of back out here, give you some perspective to see it, just to give you an idea of the location. The location here really kind of focuses on, this part of the Nile and being a conduit, right? Because, the Nile is kind of peppered with some rocky areas, cataracts. There's 6 of them. Most of them are in Nubia, some in lower Nubia, but most are in upper Nubia, where it's hard to get up and down. It's hard to navigate. So being able to navigate that areas, or navigate it during the flood season, or just being in control, is kind of a choke point. So if you have people farther south and they have resins that are important to people farther north, whether they're in the Mediterranean or in Kemet, or they have things like ivory, or they have things like diorite, or certain types of stone that are important to people. People are trading. People know that these things come from farther south, and there are things that are coming from the Mediterranean that are coming down into Kush. So when you think about this, think about it like a highway and a trade, and they're doing things that people do. And it made the people who controlled this area, this whole area that would become Kush, and the whole area that's around Kerma and the third cataract of the Nile, it made the people there powerful. They were not just, subject to somebody else. They were not just subject to somebody else's will. They were powerful, and they had their own societies, their own kings in their own right. So when you think about that, the whole ebb and flow of Kushite history a lot of times goes along with the trade, and goes along with what you would expect people are going to do whenever there are resources. There are going to be fights over resources. There are going to be people who say, I own this, and people who want to have that, and people who want to come in. It happens today. It's happening today, and not just a long time ago. We are fighting over resources and fighting over land and trying to push people out of here and take control of that. That's happening today for things that we feel are powerful. So it's no different, thousands of years ago, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago. So as we look at that, this whole area that is Kerma and Napata and Meroitic, just so you can get that perspective, that whole area that's right around here, Kerma and Napata and the 4th cataract of the Nile, these are centers of power in what was ancient Kush, right? They're centers of power in what was ancient Kush. And it doesn't surprise you that you start to find people developing and ebbing and flowing in terms of their power up and down this area. So as we think about that, as we think about pre-Kerma, they give us this idea, kind of a pre-Kerma period. So that's around 3,500 to about 2,500 BC. You see people in this area, they're doing the things that we talk about. They're trading. They are going through, even prior to this point, as the desertification and the drying out of the Sahara Desert continued to expand after its grassy period, people start to go towards water. And even the flow of the Nile and the location of Nile is not exactly where it was 8,000 years ago. Things have changed. So you see the societies in this area kind of flow with the Nile and go close to water, as you might expect, as the desert starts to grow and to dry out during this time period. So you find people, as I mentioned, developing power and coming in and being able to kind of take over things as they move forward God bless you. Thanks you much for joining. Thank you so much for the information, JB. I very much appreciate it. JB. I want to make sure I pronounce it right. Thank you so much. I want to say thank you very much. So I appreciate the support. So I'm just so I very much appreciate that. So as we look at that, so as I think about that, we look about that, we kind of go back and kind of look at it. So I very much appreciate you. For sending the $5. I very much appreciate that. It all helps. You know, when you do this, it's a lot of work. I appreciate it. It all helps. So as we dig into this and we start to think about it, you know, we start to think about these periods. And not only do you have a period of more than 1,000 years where people are kind of moving through and coming up and down this area, and many things are happening. Peace and love. God bless you. God bless you. So yeah, we can look at that, the Phoenicians and God, thank you. So I appreciate that. Not only do we have a situation where people are kind of moving forward, and we're getting the whole concept around, you know, people moving forward and coming into this area and establishing power and, you know, maybe dynasties developing. You find that happening in the early Kerma period that archaeologists like to say, in the middle Kerma period. You start to see a blossoming of urbanization. You start to see an area where people are developing religious centers like they had done before. They're just doing more of it. More people are gathered around this area, the third cataract of now, and it becomes urbanized. You end up having religious center. As I kind of showed you, kind of gave you a little bit of picture of it right here. You end up having a religious center right here as we kind of move through, and you can begin to see some of the structures. Some of it is circular. Some of it's kind of has its own unique architecture, separate from people who might be a little farther north. They begin to develop their own kind of perspective around that. And as we kind of look at it, you start to see, just to kind of give you some perspective around it, you start to see them developing their religious centers. And this is one of the holy mountains of Jebel Barco that's developed. That's probably an earlier place that's been in Kush for a long period of time, and it's developed more after the New Kingdom kind of comes in charge. And you can see the temple that's at the bottom of the mountain of Jebel Barco. But as people are doing that and kind of moving forward, they are developing their own religious centers. And this is another view of that space that we just looked at, that we kind of panned over. This is another view of a religious center. So that whole area of Kerma had at the focus of it a religious center and a kind of a mass of a urbanization, a mass of people. And they had houses, and they had trade centers, and they had hearths for being able to cook, and they had pens for animals, and they had a port, and they had a ceremonial city, and they had the structures where they met and planned and devised and developed strategies, apparently warlike strategies when they were having challenges, and kind of coalitions that came together. You find this taking place in Kush in this whole entire time. So whether you're going to an early Kerma part, or you're looking like 2050 BC to 1750 BC, this is all taking place. And then you start to get into a period of time in ancient Kush where it's called classic Kerma. They are at its height. The people are the rich, really. I mean, you start to have them have massive graves, these massive tumuli that are huge circles that are many, many feet in diameter. And they have thousands, literally like 4,000 or 5,000 heads of cattle, like Bukrania, heads of cattle buried with apparently important rulers. And you have maybe other people buried with them as well. And you find them beginning to do things like they have a custom in ancient Kush where they buried people in beds. And you find that even until the modern time, you'll find people in some parts of the Sudan will use beds to carry the deceased person to their gravesite. That was something that's kind of unique to the culture in Kerma and the culture in Kush, the use of beds and the use of some of the things they did in their ceremonies. So they become very rich and powerful in this time frame. God bless you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Your reading is very important. They become very powerful in this time frame, and you start to find, a lot of things are taking place. You start to find that the Kemetic people are having a challenge. And after the New Kingdom, after you have a period of time where the Hyksos are basically taking over parts of ancient Kemet. So we take a look back at this map here, you will find that lower Kemet and ancient Kemet begin to be challenged, right? You end up having upper Kemet is ruled by the 17th dynasty and the family that will become the 18th dynasty. And they have people who are Hyksos in the north who are threatening them. And there is some documentation to suggest that the people in the north who are Hyksos were trying to pair up with the Kushite people to the south, because around about this time, around 1500 or so, BC or in 1550 BC, you find that Kush is powerful, that they're controlling the trade routes. They apparently have taken over Lower Nubia, and they're right at the doorstep of ancient Kemet. And you find some of the people who are some of the rulers in the Upper Kemet saying, I got the Hyksos, basically foreign rulers on my north, and I have Kushite people right on my south. I feel like I'm being sandwiched in. What kind of ruler am I if I can't take over this? And so you find that the new kingdom fights back. They end up kicking out the Hyksos and kicking them all the way into Palestine, driving them all the way out of Kemet, and then they end up coming into Kush, and they come into Kush for 400 and something years, like 430 years. They end up taking over Kush, and as they take over Kush, there's a lot of interaction. There's already exchange. Remember, they already know each other. People somehow try to make it seem like it was the first time. They already know each other. They're already trading. They already have had fights. They already have had periods of peace. They already have had trading of ivory and diorite and gold and incense. And remember, a lot of times the people from Kemet took various routes to get to Punt. Sometimes they went south in this area and went out and interacted with many different people. So they already knew each other. But at this time, Kemet saw Kush as a threat and took it over for a period of about 400 years, 430 years. And so you have this whole thing taking place. And then, the new kingdom falls. And when the new kingdom falls, you end up having a situation where the people in Kush reunite. And I think it's an amazing thing when you think about this vast area. If we kind of go here and look back at the map, and we think about this vast area that is around Upper Nubia and Lower Nubia, this whole vast area, to be able to take people who had been under somebody else's rule and kind of, fighting with their own independence, also keeping up their own traditions, because a lot of the things that the New Kingdom, the Kemetic people did, they allowed the Kushite people to continue to serve their gods and kind of mixed with them. It wasn't like a hateful thing in terms of their religion, but you find this massive area beginning to unite, beginning to come together. So some of the men and the women who made that happen, I want to recognize them. Let's talk about them, because I think that's a remarkable thing. Anytime you galvanize any people, because we talk about a lot, and we were talking about Kwanzaa or just the whole concept of unity. How do you create unity? Here is a people thousands of years ago, more than 3,000 years ago, who did it. Right? 3,000 who did that unity thing. So let's kind of talk about them and kind of call their names, because being able to create a unity is no easy task. And of course, we don't know exactly how they did it, but we do know that they did it. We do know that they came together and that they were able to take a large amount of people in a large area and to put them under one rule. And I gotta say this, because I think that anytime you see Kemetic people, Kushite people, African people, a lot of different people come together, a lot of times it's under religion, it's under God. A lot of times they unite themselves for a spiritual purpose, a higher purpose, or some type of moral purpose. It's always connected to spirituality. And that seems to be able to bring people together and hold them together for a longer period of time. When people talk about unity, God bless you, Yashua. I very much appreciate it. Thank you so much. I very much appreciate it. Thank you for the pounds. I very much appreciate it. When you start to think about, how you bring people together and how you hold them together, spirituality comes in there. And the Kushite people were spiritual. I mean, there's no two ways about it. They were spiritual people. And as we start to think about it, just so you can see the timeline here, and like I said, those who are members, this will be on the site so you can see it, just so you can see the timeline. So the New Kingdom is ruling from about 1500 or so to about 1070. And then you have this period of kind of renewal from about 1070 to 900, where they are regrouping. They are starting to figure out, who's going to be in charge. How are we going to structure our society? How are we going to make the things we want to make and continue to be a strong trading partner and a powerhouse again? I mean, this is what they're trying to do. How to become a powerhouse, because they have all these resources, as we mentioned. And as you look at the map, you see all these resources that are coming up and down the Nile that they control. They can control them. How do we begin to take this period of time after the New Kingdom falls and they have an opportunity to reunite? How do we do that? And they end up reuniting in 900 BC, right? Around about that time, they end up reuniting in 900 BC. And this is called the Napatan Dynasty. This is what the Napatan Dynasty is about. So just so you can get some perspective, you take a look, there are several major areas in ancient Kush, right? The one is Kerma, which we talked about, right? That Kerma part is right here around the third cataract of the Nile. That's Kerma. It's an ancient city. It was there 3,500 BC. It's been there for a long period of time, and there are ruins, as you can see, as a part of ancient Kerma right here. And then you also have the city of Napata, right? That's one of the other major cities. There are other cities in addition to these, but Napata becomes, when Kush reunites, when Kush rises up again, they end up making their capital now at Napata, closer to the fourth cataract of Nile. And that's where you have the Holy Mountain and the Temple of Amen and a lot of things, and many of their burials, which we'll talk about, are there in around the fourth cataract of Nile. So the Napatan Dynasty is the dynasty that's a part of the 25th dynasty that they call for ancient Kemet, which is really their own dynasty. This is the dynasty that we're talking about. And later on, after the Napatan Dynasty kind of changes and the capital changes, for some reason we don't know, but the capital changes, they end up going to Meroe. And Meroe, around this between the fifth and sixth cataract of Nile, becomes the capital of Kush later on after 300 BC. And people like Queen Amanirenas and people like that are part of that Meroitic dynasty, so a part of Meroe. So you think about Kerma, Napata, and Meroe. Those are the three major areas, three of the main areas in ancient Kush as a part of this renewal period. So as we take a look at it, let's look at some of these names. Let's look at some of these brothers' names, because we do not know all the names of the people who were there at 900 BC. There's been a lot of documentation, a lot of archaeology. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. A lot of archaeology has been done in ancient Kem and in ancient Sudan. And initially, let's just be honest, some of the things that were done by George Reisner, if you read his stuff, I want to share the name in case you want to do your research. George Reisner, he did a lot of the initial, in the early 1900s, documentation and excavation of this whole area, but he just thought it was Kemet. He just thought this was Egypt and nothing else. Nothing to see here. These are just people who were kind of offshoots of Egypt or something like that, or Libyan people. He was wrong. He was completely wrong in a lot of his assumptions, although he documented and uncovered a lot of stuff. And then you push forward ahead. A gentleman by the name of Charles Bonnet, who's a Swiss archaeologist, has gone there and went for a period of over 50 years. Literally, you can go into 1960s, 70s, 80s. He's excavating, and he helped to find some of the large cache of the statues you see of people from the Napatan Dynasty. So a lot has been done in the past 100 years, really, to shed light on this whole area. We do not know exactly who the people were at 900 BC when the Napatan Dynasty started, but we do begin to pick up names when we pick up Alar. So I want to kind of share Alar's name with you. He is the brother, literally, who helps to join Upper Nubia. So that southern part of Nubia, that southern part of Kush, around the third, the fourth cataract, he is helping to join this together. He's making this thing stick. They had done a lot in their family to coalesce and to develop a society and develop a hierarchy, but Alaric comes around, he starts to make this stick. He really starts to make this society form and gel, and really starts to make it come under central leadership. So that's Alaric. And so I kind of put him at one. And then his brother Kashta comes along, and Kashta begins to take this whole thing. He begins to take this whole thing and take the whole part of upper Nubia and this whole part of Kush, and he pushes right into lower Nubia. And one of the things that's very interesting that people don't like to talk about when it comes to Kemet, Egypt, and Kush is that when these Kushite people came, when Kashta came, he was treated kindly. He was not treated as a foe. He was not treated as an enemy. See, they were already practicing and worshiping the same deities. You'll see the names that we talk about. A lot of them refer to Amani, which is like a Kushite way of saying Amen. They were not pushed away. The Kemetic priest in Waset, which was one of the most powerful and most important cities in ancient Kemet's entire history, were welcoming and brothering and partnering with the Kushite people. It was not a hate thing. It was not a look down at you thing. They were partnering with them. And part of that evidence and part of that begins to take place when Kashta becomes king. So Kashta and Alar are brothers. So these are two men who are brothers. And when Kashta takes over, he pushes the kingdom forward up north and begins to take over more land, Lower Nubia, and basically kind of goes into the part of the southern part of ancient Kemet. So you find a brotherhood, you find a sisterhood. And one of the things these men do, one of the things the Kushite families do is that they put in place strong female leaders. When Kashta comes in and he begins to take over part of what is the Waset and the whole temple at Karnak, and he begins to have influence, and then his son Piankhy, they put their daughters and their female family members in charge of the temple of Karnak. They become God's wife of Amen. So these men are not coming in by themselves. They are looking and they are taking a Kushite value of men and women being equal. They're taking that into Kemet and they're putting it in place and they're making sure that it happens. So you find Kashta is the person who pushes into Lower Nubia and into the southern Kemet. And then Piankhy comes around, and Piankhy, he begins to take over the whole thing. The famous Stela, and I read about that in my book, Religion of the Black Land on Amazon. He begins as a huge famous Stela that talks about his victory, how he took over the rest of Kemet. He came in and it wasn't just the lower part of Kemet. It wasn't just, the southern part. He comes in and he takes over the northern part too. He begins to come in and take over this whole part and begin to really establish the dynasty that people call the 25th dynasty. But I want to make the point that they were not the 25th dynasty so much of Kemet. It's like making them be important just because they were in Kemet. They were a dynasty in and of themselves. They already had rulerships. They already had a land. They already had kingship before they came into Kemet and took over all of it. Before King Piankhy, right? Long before him, they had already established their leadership. They had already established their society. They had already established and did things with their religion. They were already doing these things with trade. They didn't need Kemet to validate them. We just talk about them, and we should not talk about them just in context of Kemet, like that made them important. They were already developing their society, and they would go on for a long time, for over 1,000 years after this, still practicing the ways of the north of the Nile Valley in terms of the civilization. So this whole area here that we're looking at, Upper Kemet, Lower Nubia, Upper Nubia, they become all united under King Piankhy. And when they talk about the two lands, when the Kushite pharaohs talk about the two lands, they're talking about literally Kush and Kemet, not just Upper and Lower Kemet. They're talking about the real two lands from their perspective, right? And so you begin to see that they're moving forward, and you'll notice, I'll just kind of put something else you can kind of you'll notice a lot of times you'll see up there the double urea. There are very specific ways you'll find that Kushite people dressed and Kushite kings dressed as they began to kind of move through and take over the power, the reins of power, if you will. So King Piankhy is the third king in this line that we talk about. As you think about Alara, think about Kashta. I want to call their names, right? King Piankhy, I know some people say Pai, and then King Shabaka. Shabaka is also a part of this family. And the famous Shabaka Stone that talks about, Ptah creating everything and saying that what you hear, what a person hears, sees, and breathes upon feeds into their heart and makes all of their beliefs come true. Makes all of their beliefs manifest, makes all of things manifest. Like whatever you see, hear, and breathe in your heart will create your beliefs and bring forth things in your life. This is the Shabaka Stone. Right? This is the Shabaka Stone from King Shabaka. And a lot of people will kind of poo-poo that, or they'll call it the Memphite theology. There's a lot of talk about Taharqa and what he did, as we'll touch on that. And there's some talk about that. We'll touch on. You're saying whether or not King Taharqa took Spain. There is some documentation that mentions Taharqa going into places like Europe or various places. I'll try to get that because I want to show you the actual documentation that mentions that. As one of the later historical writers who talk about King Taharqa after he lived and mentions him going in places as if he's like a conqueror and an emperor. So we can talk about that a little bit. But King Shabaka has the Shabaka Stone. If you ever heard of the Memphite theology, that's the Shabaka Stone. And that's this man. This is a part of the Napatan Dynasty of ancient Kush. And so this whole idea of God being, the creator, and whatever you hear, see, and breathe upon feeds into your heart and makes all of your beliefs come forth is a sublime and a wonderful thing to think about. You start to get an idea of Kushite and Kemetic theology. Like, what were they believing, right? How did they take these things to heart? And they were very serious about their religion. They were very serious about their commitment. They were very serious that women played certain roles that were important, that men played roles. They were serious. They lived these things out. And so you find Shabaka, and then you find Shabika or Shabiku, people will call it different things, also becomes the next king. And right around this time, Taharqa, who becomes probably one of the most famous people in this dynastic era, he begins to be a young man. He becomes, somebody who's coming up to ancient Kemet. And he's coming up there probably when his uncle or one of his family members is in charge. And he is the person mentioned in the Bible. So if you look in 2 Kings, I believe it's 2 Kings 19:9 or 9:19. I think it's 19:9. 2 Kings, and you will look at several places. You will find that King Taharqa is mentioned in the Bible more than once as being a king of Ethiopia and coming to fight the Assyrian army, basically in some ways to save Jerusalem, to try to save the people in Jerusalem. So King Taharqa becomes a major figure. And I have a course for those who are members on YouTube. King Taharqa becomes a major figure in this whole area. He becomes a major figure in Kemetic history. He is someone who is on massive building campaigns. As I mentioned, he's mentioned in the Bible. He fights the Assyrian army several times. Some of those times he fought them and either won or was able to live to tell about it. He eventually lost to the Assyrian army, but that's after a period of like decades of reigning in ancient Kemet. And so he's somebody who left his mark, even on people later on, as I mentioned, as someone was mentioning in the comments. Even Greek writers later on, historians, remembered King Taharqa for his building, for his military prowess, for his leadership, for his conquering people, for his ability to be committed to our men. King Taharqa stands out for all the things doing and the things that he was doing in terms of his building projects, whether it was at the mountain. There's an amazing kind of like scaffold that he built at the mountain of Jebel Barko that's right on part of it that kind of sticks out by itself, where they had scaffolding, and he placed a monument right on the top of this thing that looks like a bit of a stick in a cliff. How they got up there is an engineering marvel, but it was done under King Taharqa, recognizing him and talking about what he was doing for our men and how he was kind of moving forward. So you will find a lot about King Taharqa. And as I mentioned, I had a course on him that I have on my website for those who are members here about King Taharqa. And then you find Tuetamani. Tuetamani becomes the next king in this line. And this is him right here. As we kind of look at Tuetamani, we see him right here. This is Tuetamani. And this is him right here. And you can see, some of the places in terms of where he was and how he's kind of moving forward. But Tuetamani is another person who respects his mom, who talks a lot about his mom. There's a famous Stela where he talks about becoming king and how God visited him in a dream. You also end up having after him Nursa and various people, Alamani who come, Aspelta. These are all people we have documentation of. So as I kind of look at them and kind of roll down our names, I want you to see Talca. We have many people here. They did Karkakamani. We have many people here as we kind of scroll down this whole list of people. And as I said, if you remember, I have this timeline, you can download it. And we start to see people, even as we get down to Natasan, who is the last person in this line of the Napatan kings, right? And I think about this for a second. He's the last person in this line. And they basically have two places where they're burying. They're burying themselves either in Erkuru or in Nuri, which is right around that fourth cataract of Anau near Napata. That's where they're burying. These kings are all buried either in Erkuru or in Nuri. And most of them in Nuri after Taharqa. After Taharqa moves his grave there. But when I think about this is the same line. We'll stop for a minute, because this Napatan Dynasty lasts from about 900 BC to about 300 BC. Stop for a minute. Hundreds of years, some 600 years, you find, hundreds of years, they're lasting, and it's like the same family line. When you think about unity, when you think about being able to stay together, when you think about sticking together, here these people are here and they are developing their own family line. They're developing their own culture, and they're able to live. Imagine if your family, and you can go down 600 years into the future, and people in your family still related to you are still in control, still running a company that you helped to start, or still living in an area or controlling a country or something like that. That's an amazing thing. That's what these Napatan men and women did. They were able to create a dynasty that lasted for more than 600 years. This is just one part of the dynasty because it goes on beyond this. They were able to create a dynasty that lasted for 600 years and to move forward. And I want to kind of share another part of this because just to let you know, after the Napatan Dynasty, after these some 26 people, and there are more than that because we don't know all the names, after this period right here from about 900 to 300 BC, then there's a Meroitic period. And it's just called Meroitic period because the capital is apparently moved farther south between the 5th and 6th dynasty, 5th and 6th cataract. And that's where the burial grounds are there, the official burial grounds, and the center of power is moved farther south. And you see people like Queen Amani-Renas, Amani-Tore, a whole lot of important people, which we will be getting into that as well. And this is an example of Queen Amani-Tore. And you see the symbol right here. And I'll kind of blow it up just so you can see it and see it bigger, just so you can get a picture of this. This one, I'll kind of take myself out of the shot so you can see it. This is in Meroe. And you see that here is the gentleman on one side, the king, and here's the queen on the other side. When you see this image of the ruler holding, bounding the prisoners and having the weapon raised up, you see that a lot in Kemetic art and Kemetic temples and things of that nature, but you almost never see a woman doing it. You almost never see that with women doing it. But here in Kushite, in Kush country, in Meroe, here you have both male and female, husband and wife. You have male and female, king and queen, both holding the symbols of power. Both of them. This woman here is grabbing them. And even on one of these things, you can see a Roman person on one of the temples there, which we'll try to get a picture of a little bit later on. But you see the whole concept, what do you value, right? What's important to you? It's clear that the Kushite people throughout their history valued women. Like women were strong. That wasn't a big deal to have a man conquering enemies as well as a woman doing it. And it wasn't just one woman. You see many women predicted like that and pictured like that. It's more than one. So when you look at that and we get a perspective of ancient Kush, you start to see their value system. And I want to point out, just so you can see it as you're kind of looking at it, God bless you. So we will kind of move forward as we're kind of doing it. So as we kind of move forward, we will we'll kind of move forward. Let's see. Let's make sure we're moving forward. So as we're doing this, just to kind of give you some perspective, hopefully everybody's still kind of on. You'll see that the Meroitic period lasted for another 600 years. So from 300 BC to 300 AD, the Meroitic period lasted. So you have the Napatan period, as we talked about in the leaders from there, from about 900 to 300 BC for about 600 years. And then another 600 years from 300 BC to 300 AD, another 600-year period of Meroitic rule. So you end up finding that the Kushite dynasty, the Kushite people, the Napatan dynasty that founded this new area of ancient Kush, they were able to develop a dynasty and a country that lasted for more than 1,200 years. After the Greeks had come and the Romans had come and taken over ancient Kemet, they were still practicing the religion and the ways long after. For 1,200 years, they were able to develop a country that lasted for 1,200 years. I think that's remarkable. And I think it's worth saying their names. I think it's worth remembering them. Whether it's Lara or Kashta or Taharqa, as we move down to Spelta, and we go all the way down the list, all the way down to NASA, just to see the people and to think about the men and the women who were able to develop a dynasty that lasted so long. So I just wanted to share that. And like I said, the timeline is out there for those who are at the ancestor level, who are members here on YouTube. We're going to come back and dig more into this because I want to connect this with the Meroitic time period and to dig more into this and to talk about the queens, because it's not just the men, as we know, who were running things. It was the queens as well. So I thank you so much. I appreciate you joining me. Thank you so much. Put your comments down below. I'm going to check them out, and I very much appreciate it. God bless you. Thank you very much.